All right, so today let's dive into those tricky emotions that kind of always seem to pop up during meditation.
Yeah.
You brought some writings that I think are really going to help us explore how our minds work.
Okay.
And it seems like we're going to be looking for ways to deal with those emotions that come up when we're trying to find some peace and quiet.
Yeah, it's like we're putting together a toolkit.
Exactly, a toolkit for our minds.
Yeah.
And the source material here jumps right into this analogy of the mind as a committee.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, yeah. The inner committee. It's a pretty powerful way to think about those feelings that can sort of take over when you're trying to meditate.
Yeah. Could you tell me a little more about what makes that so powerful?
Well, instead of feeling like you're totally overwhelmed by emotions, like they're just drowning you, this way of thinking about it, it lets you see them as different voices, almost like members of a committee.
Okay.
Each of them with their own thing they're trying to do.
So it's not so much about, pushing those emotions down or trying to ignore them.
Right.
It's more about like understanding them.
Exactly. You see those emotions as different voices, and that creates a little space between you and them.
Okay.
It's like you're running a meeting and, instead of letting the committee members just go crazy, you can learn to manage them.
That's a great image.
Yeah, just like you would in a boardroom.
I can see how that would help. But how do we actually wrangle these committee members?
Well,
They can be pretty stubborn.
yeah. The text dives into these 3 types of fabrication, which are basically what emotions are made of.
Okay.
And understanding these can really give you more control over that committee meeting that's happening in your mind.
That sounds promising.
Yeah.
So what are these fabrications?
So first we have bodily fabrication, which is all about what you feel in your body, especially your breath.
Uh-huh.
You know how your breath changes when you're anxious or mad?
Yeah, like when you're stressed, you take those little short breaths.
Exactly. Then there's verbal fabrication, which is all the chatter in your head, all those thoughts that are always going.
Right.
And then finally, there's mental fabrication, which is all your feelings and how you see the world around you.
So you're saying that our emotions are kind of put together from these 3 things?
Yeah, it's like a recipe. You put a little bit of breath,
Yeah.
a dash of thoughts, and a sprinkle of perception, and you got yourself a feeling.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that if you understand how those ingredients work together, you can actually change the recipe.
Now that's empowering.
Awesome.
So instead of feeling like my emotions are in control,
Right.
I can learn to adjust what goes into making them.
Exactly. You have more control than you think.
That's great. And that leads right into this next part of what we're looking at, where it talks about specific emotions that pop up when you're meditating.
Yeah.
And it even has ways to work with each of them.
Yeah. And remember, these are just starting points.
Right.
You got to experiment and find what works for you.
So let's start with one that I'm sure we've all felt at some point. Boredom. It can really kill a meditation session. What does this text say about dealing with boredom?
It says to become a wildlife observer of your own mind.
Wait, hold on. I'm trying to picture that. Like I'm in a jungle with binoculars waiting for some crazy mental animal to show up.
Yeah, kinda. Because when you're bored, it feels like nothing's happening.
Right.
But actually, even boredom is something that's happening.
Okay.
It's a state of mind. And instead of being hard on yourself for feeling bored, you can just watch it with curiosity.
Okay.
What does boredom actually feel like in your body? What thoughts come up?
So instead of getting annoyed that my meditation isn't going anywhere,
Right?
I can learn something from that annoyance.
Exactly. You can explore it, see what it tells you about your own mind.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about discouragement. I think we've all been there, comparing ourselves to some super meditator and feeling like we're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
What's the fix for that?
Well, the text reminds us that even the best meditators out there, they all had challenges.
Yeah.
They weren't born enlightened, They struggled and kept going just like we do.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about just showing up and putting in the work.
Exactly. And sometimes you need to give yourself a little pep talk, remind yourself that progress isn't always a straight line.
Yeah.
You'll have good days and bad days, but the important thing is to keep practicing and keep learning.
That's a good point. Sometimes I forget to be nice to myself.
Yeah.
I'm so quick to judge.
Yeah. Self-compassion is super important.
Okay, we've talked about boredom and discouragement, but there's another one that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially in our busy world: impatience. How does that show up when you're meditating, and what can we do about it?
It's not the wanting things that's the problem.
Right.
It's more about where you're directing that wanting. The text uses this analogy of driving a car to a mountain.
Okay.
If you're so focused on getting to the top, you might miss all the beautiful scenery along the way.
I see what you mean. If we're always trying to reach some like blissful state,
Right.
we might miss all the little changes and insights that happen along the way.
Exactly. And the text reminds us that meditation, it's a lifelong journey of taking care of your mind.
Uh-huh.
It's not about reaching some end goal. It's about being present and aware in every moment.
So it's not like you get your mind tuned up and then you're done.
Right.
It's more like daily hygiene for your mind.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like you brush your teeth and take a shower, you got to take care of your mind too.
Okay, so we've got boredom, discouragement, and impatience. But there are a few more big emotional ones that I think we need to talk about. Lust, anger, jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
Those can be tough to deal with even when you're not meditating.
Yeah, for sure. But the text has some good advice for handling those tough emotions.
So let's start with lust. I'm really curious about what it has to say about that one. What insights does it offer?
The main thing it says is to try and break down those fantasies that make desire so strong.
Like pop the bubble on romantic daydreams.
Yeah, kinda. It's not about denying those thoughts and feelings.
Wow.
It's more about seeing them for what they are. Stories we tell ourselves.
So how do we do that? How do we break them down?
The text says to try bringing some reality into those fantasies.
Okay.
Like if you're really focused on someone's looks, try focusing on the not so glamorous parts of them or how they act.
Uh-huh.
Or if you're caught up in a romantic story, imagine them doing something that would totally turn you off.
Okay. I can see how that would take the fun out of those fantasies.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that make meditation kind of unpleasant?
It's not about making it unpleasant. It's about breaking the spell those fantasies have over you seeing them more clearly.
Okay.
And the text really emphasizes that this is for everyone, not just monks and nuns, especially people in relationships.
Right. I can see how that would be helpful for having healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
It's not about pretending you don't have those thoughts. It's about seeing them and choosing how you want to react.
That's a good point. It's about being aware and making choices, not just pushing things down.
Okay, so we've talked about lust. What about anger? How does the text say we should deal with that fiery emotion when it comes up during meditation?
Well, it knows that sometimes you might not be in the mood for the whole loving kindness thing.
Yeah.
So it gives you a different way to think about it. Consider how your anger might actually be helping the person you're mad at.
Wait, what? How could my anger be good for them?
Well, think about it. If you're acting out of anger, saying or doing things you'll regret,
Yeah.
aren't you basically giving them reasons to judge you? You're letting your anger control you, which in a way gives them power over you.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's like I'm letting them win by losing my cool.
Yeah.
But how do I stop myself from doing that, especially when I'm in the middle of it?
The text uses this image of finding water in a cow's footprint in the desert.
Okay.
You might not like where it came from, but you need that water to survive.
Right.
In the same way, the text says to try and see the good even in the people we're mad at.
So it's not about saying what they did was okay. It's about changing how I see it.
Yeah, exactly. It helps you see things in a more balanced way and keeps your heart from getting all hard and resentful.
That's really helpful.
Huh.
Okay, switching gears a bit. What about jealousy? That's another one that can really sneak up on you.
Definitely. The text says jealousy is like a type of anger that comes from tying your happiness to things outside yourself.
Like when someone else gets the job you wanted or your favorite band breaks up.
Yeah, exactly. Things like that can make you jealous because you've linked your happiness to something you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
The text makes you ask, do you really want your happiness to depend on things that are so unpredictable and temporary?
That sounds like a recipe for unhappiness.
It usually is. The text says to try and cultivate a sense of peace and even joy for other people's successes.
Okay.
I know that might sound impossible when you're feeling jealous, but it's about training your mind to see things differently.
It's definitely something you have to practice. Speaking of practice, the text also talks about doubt, right?
Yeah.
Doubt about ourselves or doubt about the practice itself.
Both, actually. But here, it's specifically about doubting the practice, wondering if it's really doing anything or if it's all just a bunch of nonsense.
I think we've all felt that. Like, is this really working? What can we do when those doubts start creeping in?
The text offers two main things to remember. First, think about the Buddha and his students. They dedicated their whole lives to these teachings.
Yeah.
And they weren't trying to sell anything. They were just sharing what they had learned.
So it's about trusting the source, trusting the teachers who came before us.
Exactly. And the second thing is to be really honest with yourself about how you're practicing.
Okay.
Are you really putting in the effort? Are you being honest about what you're trying to do?
That makes sense. It's like doubt can be a sign to check in with ourselves, make sure we're not just going through the motions.
Exactly. And even if you're not totally convinced, the text reminds us that being honest, Working hard and really paying attention will help us no matter what. So even if we don't become enlightened, we're still developing good qualities that will help us in life.
That's a great point. Okay, this has been super insightful exploring all these emotional challenges.
There's one more thing we need to remember. The text really stresses how important it is to experiment. What works for one person might not work for another.
So there's no one right way to do it.
Not at all. It's about being curious, trying different things, and seeing what helps you deal with those inner storms more easily.
This is great. It's like we're allowed to make the practice fit our own needs.
Exactly. It's about taking control of what's going on inside you and being more mindful and kind to yourself.
It sounds like we're just starting to uncover this really interesting topic. Is there anything else we should talk about before we finish this part of our deep dive?
One thing we haven't really talked about is how managing these emotions during meditation can help us manage them in our everyday lives.
That's interesting. There's got to be some connection, right?
Yeah.
If we can learn to calm down on the meditation cushion, shouldn't those skills help us when things get tough in the real world?
That's the big question, isn't it? And while this text doesn't really go into that too much, it definitely hints at it.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a whole other deep dive in itself. But even just thinking about it briefly, do you think there are some main takeaways from these meditation strategies that we could actually use in our daily lives?
For sure. Like that idea of seeing emotions as different voices, that committee analogy we talked about, that could be really helpful when you're dealing with tough interactions.
Okay.
Instead of getting swept away by anger or frustration in an argument, you could try to step back and look at those feelings from a distance.
So instead of just reacting, I could take a moment and choose a better way to respond.
Right. It's like you're the referee in your own head, helping those different voices talk to each other.
That's a great way to think about it. And the ways of dealing with specific emotions could also work in real-life situations, like the advice for handling boredom in meditation. Instead of getting all restless and frustrated, we can practice just watching those feelings with curiosity. Couldn't we do that when we're stuck in a long line at the store or waiting for an important call?
Exactly. You can turn those boring moments into little meditation sessions.
Yeah. Instead of letting impatience take over, we could use that time to practice mindfulness, noticing what's happening in our body and the thoughts going through our head.
And the technique for dealing with discouragement could be super useful in everyday life too. When you're facing setbacks or challenges, you can remind yourself that even the most successful people have had to overcome obstacles and failures.
So instead of beating myself up, I could be more kind and encouraging to myself, like a good friend cheering me on.
Exactly. And what about that strategy for dealing with lust? Remember the idea of breaking down those fantasies?
Yeah. Bringing in reality to burst the bubble.
Well, that same idea could apply to all the advertising around us that's always trying to make us want things.
You mean like how they use perfect models and fake scenarios to make us crave the newest gadgets, clothes, or whatever?
Exactly. If we can learn to see through those manufactured fantasies, we can be smarter consumers, less likely to buy things we don't need.
That's so important. It's like we're teaching our minds to look deeper and question those automatic urges that make us do things.
And speaking of urges, the ways of dealing with anger and jealousy seem really relevant to how we treat other people.
For sure. Remember that picture of finding water in a cow's footprint?
Yeah.
I could apply to tough relationships. Instead of just focusing on the things about someone that annoy us, we can try to find anything good about them. It might not be easy, but even a little change in how we see them can make a big difference in how we treat them.
It's like choosing to focus on the good instead of the bad.
Yeah. And the strategy for jealousy could also be really helpful with all the social media stuff, where we're always seeing pictures of other people's supposedly perfect lives.
It's so easy to compare yourself and feel bad, but you're saying we can use those moments to practice being okay with things, to be happy for others instead of envious.
Exactly. It's not about pretending we don't have desires or that everything's great.
Right.
It's about realizing that happiness that depends on things outside of us is temporary and unreliable. Real contentment comes from inside, from cultivating things like gratitude, compassion, and acceptance. So in a way, these meditation strategies are like training grounds for developing those inner qualities that help us deal with life's complexities with more wisdom and grace.
That's a great way to put it. By being more aware and compassionate during meditation, we can bring those qualities into our interactions with the world and make a positive impact.
That brings us back to why we started this deep dive, to find practical ways to work with tough emotions during meditation. We've looked at a bunch of emotions and strategies, but it seems like the biggest takeaway is the idea of experimenting.
Absolutely. The text really emphasizes that there's no one right way to meditate, just like there's no one right way to live. It's
Yeah.
all about finding what works for you, what helps you create a more peaceful and balanced mind.
So instead of getting stuck in rules, we can approach meditation with curiosity and try new things, trusting our own inner wisdom to guide us.
That's the spirit. And remember, meditation is a practice, not a performance. There will be days when it's easy and days when it's hard. The key is to just keep showing up, keep practicing, keep learning.
And to remember that even the tough times can help us grow and learn.
Exactly. Every time we notice we're distracted, every time we gently put our attention back to the breath, we're making our minds stronger and building awareness and self-control.
And those skills, it seems, can help us in so many ways beyond meditation.
It's like we're planting seeds of mindfulness and compassion that can grow and affect all parts of our lives.
I love that. Okay, before we wrap up this part, I want to touch on one more thing that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
The idea of doubt.
Yeah. Doubt is something we all face on this path. It can show up in so many ways, from questioning if the practice even works to doubting if we can make any progress.
I think it's important to realize that doubt is normal. It's a natural part of the journey.
Definitely. It means we're really engaging with the practice, not just blindly following along. And the text has some really helpful advice for working with doubt. Remember those 2 antidotes.
Yes. First, trusting the source, thinking about all the teachers who devoted their lives to these teachings. And second, being really honest with ourselves about how much effort we're putting in.
Exactly. Those 2 things can really help get rid of doubt and build a stronger, more confident approach to the practice.
And even if those doubts stick around, the text says that just developing qualities like honesty, hard work, and really paying attention will help us whether or not we achieve some big enlightenment experience.
It's like we're building a foundation for a more mindful and meaningful life, one step at a time, one breath at a time.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about reaching some far-off goal, but about enjoying the journey, embracing the good and the bad, the challenges and the wins that come with developing a more aware and compassionate heart.
It really is a journey, isn't it? And it all goes back to that idea of the mind being like a committee. You know, if we can learn to work with all those different voices inside us to create a more peaceful inner world, who knows what we can achieve?
It's an exciting thought. And it seems like all these tools and techniques we've been talking about, they give us a way to actually cultivate that inner peace.
For sure. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to say that this is just the beginning.
Right.
There's still so much more to learn, so many layers to uncover.
It's like we've been given a map and a compass. And now it's our turn to go on an adventure to explore our own minds.
That's a great way to think about it. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are tons of resources out there. Books, articles, meditation groups, teachers.
Yeah, it's good to remember that we're all in this together, helping each other, learning from each other, and inspiring each other along the way. And who knows, maybe by becoming more aware and compassionate ourselves, we can actually help create a more peaceful world for everyone.
That's a beautiful idea. And as we finish up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if the real practice isn't just about calming your mind when you meditate, but about bringing that same sense of presence and awareness into everything you do? To your relationships, your work, how you interact with the world around you.
That's a powerful challenge, to take what we learn on the meditation cushion and let it spread out, changing not just ourselves, but the world we live in.
Exactly. It's about seeing that every moment, every interaction is a chance to practice mindfulness, to be kind, to live with more awareness and compassion.
So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring this path. It's so rich and rewarding. Experiment with what we've talked about. Find what works for you and see how these practices can change your experience of meditation and of life itself.
And remember, the journey of self-discovery, it never really ends. It's full of challenges and triumphs. Embrace it all, and may your path be filled with peace, joy, and a deep sense of connection.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring this amazing world of meditation and the incredible potential of the human mind.